current science indicates that individuals can reduce their risk of cognitive decline, dementia, and Alzheimer's disease up to 70, maybe even some science says 75%. And they believe that right now, with the science where it is at the current time, about 40% of all dementias in our communities can be prevented. So the main things about prevention are what I've got here. Eat well, get moving, stay sharp with your brain, be social, sleep enough, address all chronic diseases like diabetes, high blood pressure, reduce your stress, make sure you hear well, avoid those meds that actually are bad for your brain and people of my age and older should not be taking. And then there's a couple other things that I'll talk about today. So I'm going to start out with Eat Well. This is the one that probably has the most science behind it. But again, I will not say that this is an absolute great study because most of the studies on the MIND diet and good diets are only about 5, maybe at most 10 years long. And obviously to look at things like dementia, we need to be following a period for decades. But this is one that we know probably helps. And that's the MIND diet. It stands for the Mediterranean, and you all know the Mediterranean is just a good, healthy diet. The DASH diet, DASH, in case you're not familiar with it, that is a hypertensive diet, mainly to lower sodium in the diet. So the Mediterranean DASH intervention for neurodegenerative delay, and that's one of those ones where they sat around the table trying desperately to make it spell out mind, but they got it. It was developed in the Rush University Medical Center, was funded by the National Institute of Aging. They published it about 5-6 years ago, and they had followed almost 1,000 people in Chicago over not quite 5 years, and about 144 of them did develop Alzheimer's. But the bottom line was the longer the people had followed this MIND diet, the less risk they appeared to have. In fact, those people who followed the MIND diet moderately well seem to have about a 35% lower risk than people who weren't on the MIND diet. And those people who followed it rigorously seem to have about a 53% less risk. Now, I'll tell you, one of the problems with all of these studies, and this happens in most of science, is very seldom do you find people who do everything terrible except one thing really well, like eat well, but they sit on their couch all day, they watch, mindless TV or whatever. People who eat well usually are also doing other things that are healthy. So it's a little bit hard to pull these things apart. So you'll notice that a lot of times you added up all of the percentages I'm going to tell you today, you'd be way over 100%. But the bottom line is people who followed a MIND diet, the Mediterranean and low sodium diet, seem to do much better over a 5-year period than those people who didn't. Since that time, they've done 2 more large studies and found significantly slower cognitive decline in people who ate at least 2 servings of vegetables a day. And the strongest effect seems to be seen with leafy green vegetables, especially dark leafy green or leafy dark green vegetables, such as spinach. By the way, I'm going to go back. One of the things we do promote people eating lots of leafy green vegetables. We do have people who are on things like Coumadin, warfarin, and have been told not to eat leafy green vegetables. The bottom line is nobody should significantly change their diet abruptly, especially with things like this. But you can eat 6 servings of leafy green vegetables, even if you're on Coumadin, warfarin. You just need to watch your coagulation studies and adjust for that and then stay constant. So it's not an absolute that people cannot do something like this to lower their risk of dementia if they're on an anticoagulant. Okay, the next thing is to get moving. And we specifically don't call this exercise because a lot of people in their mind, when you say exercise, say, oh, that means I have to go to the gym, I have to put on black spandex shorts, and I have to sweat. Well, no. They found that even mild physical activity, such as walking, is associated with decreased risk of cognitive impairment. In fact, some studies have shown that people who have mild cognitive function can even reverse some of that with movement. But the movement, this exercise must be regular. In other words, you can't just sit on the couch for 6 days a week and then go play basketball for 3 hours on Saturday. No, that doesn't, the science says that doesn't seem to work very well. So it must be regular, and it should tend towards being more vigorous, meaning that you get your heart rate up and you have a little bit of increase in your breathing rate. But all of these studies looked at various different things, and the bottom line is having somebody just walk from, say right now, they walk 2,000 steps a day up to 4,000 steps a day can make a significant difference in their risk for dementia. The CDC guidelines right now is to move for 30 minutes, 3 or more times a week, and that's where I would at least try to start with most of the patients. But it can be just walking around the block, or taking their dog for a walk, or dancing, or bike riding. It doesn't have to be, again, sweating heavily at the gym with spandex on. So if you do vigorous activity, and this is basically, vigorous is defined as you're getting to the point where it's hard to say a complete sentence. You're only able to get a few words out at a time. But if you do vigorous exercise or activity for 1 to 2 times a week, it appears that your risk of dementia can go down by about 30 to 40%. Now, if you do it 3 or more times a week, it gets better, 35 to 50% risk reduction. But this is vigorous activity. And for some people, that level of activity is not as doable. Moderate activity can give you a very significant risk reduction also. Moderate would be you're having to breathe hard, but you're not to the point of gasping out phrases and that's all you can do, which would be vigorous. Okay, the next one is sort of what I call it, the use it or lose it, the stay sharp. People need to continue mental engagement and cognitive training of some kind. This seems to improve immediate and delayed recall, in other words, memory. And you all know, people who continue to work until their 90s do better than the person who at 60 stops working, goes home, sits at home at the couch, and never does another thing with their brain for the rest of their life. So we know that keeping the brain working is incredibly important. Now, when they do these studies, they have found that things like doing a crossword puzzle every day, well, that's not bad for you, but it's not probably going to be as good as a lot of other things. So the ones that they've looked at are things that are hard, that take time, and that you have to use. So the ones they've looked at in a lot of these studies is things like learning a new language. That seems to take a lot of brain energy. And I'll just tell you from somebody who's tried to learn a new language, that's hard. But if you do learn it, of course, you use it. Another one is learning a new skill, such as learning to play a new musical instrument, but it could be something like learning how to watercolor, learn how to do carpentry, taking a college class. But if you do that, you don't just audit it, you have to use it. So you have to write the papers and take the tests, things like that. But you can see all of these are things that, are hard. These are not easy things. But to be honest, you all know in your everyday life, you're probably doing these things all the time, learning something new, reading journals, learning new medicine things. So learning these things and keeping your mind sharp is very important. In fact, compared to somebody who basically doesn't use their brain at all, you can decrease your risk somewhere around 47 to 63%. And I like this quote, the mind is like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the stronger it will get and the more it can expand. Next, being social. This science is not as hardcore, but it seems to be very, very important. If we look at people who are incredibly lonely, and so I'm talking about, the old man who lives in an apartment all by himself, never talks to anybody, doesn't have any family or friend, etc. That person is at extraordinary high risk for developing dementia. There is something about interacting with other people that is very important for our brains. So if you have a patient who sits in their apartment all day long by themselves for years at a time, their risk of dementia can go up by 60%. We know that interacting with others often can cause about a 50% decreased risk of cognitive decline when compared to those who are not socially active. Now, we know that each person has a difference in what they feel comfortable with being socially active. There are gregarious people and we have introverts. But we do try to ask people or to tell people to have about 5 to 6 social ties. And we like people to have social ties in 3 different layers. Basically, number 1 layer is you've got somebody who's such a close friend or family member that at 3 o'clock in the morning when something goes wrong, you can call them and they're going to be at your door as fast as they can get there. So sort of that emergency 3 o'clock in the morning, I can call and they're going to be there to help me. The second layer of the social guidelines would be the ones that we usually think about, our friends, the person you call up who loves to go to rom-com movies. So your friend that goes to movies, maybe it's your friend who loves ethnic food and you go out to dinner, or the guy down the road that you like to go walk your dogs together. Those are the people in this middle group. You know them, they're your friends, you do things with them a couple times a month. The lowest level, which is a level we usually don't think about, and there's actually a book written about it, it's called Consequential Strangers. These are people we don't know very well, we may not even know their name, but we recognize them. So it could be the lady down the street that you walk past who's always out in her garden and you say hi and how's your kids doing or whatever. Or it could be the guy who makes your coffee at the coffee shop, or just whoever. But it's people that recognize you, you recognize them, you stop and chat for a minute, but you really don't know them that well. Those are consequential strangers, and those seem to be critically important for you to feel like you belong in your community, and this is indeed your community. When you move and don't know anybody, one of the things that happens is you feel that you don't know those people and you lose those ties, and that's one of the reasons why moving sometimes can be uncomfortable. Now I'm going to talk for just a second about being able to hear well. The Lancet put together a commission to look at dementia risk. In fact, at the end, I'll give you the link to it. You can get it off the internet. And they defined hearing impairment as the most easily modifiable risk factor for dementia. They say, and of course this is in the British Isles, but they believe that about 8% of all dementia risk in their community is due to hearing loss, which is huge, to be honest. And this risk was only associated with the worst cognition with those people who were not using hearing aids. So it wasn't so much the loss of hearing, the pathological loss of hearing, it was the not being able to hear. If they had loss of hearing but used hearing aids, their risk went back up to normal. Now, how much of a risk is there? Well, they felt that the increase of risk for an individual was got worse by about 1/3 for every decibel of worsening hearing loss. But hearing aids got rid of that risk. So right now we are recommending that every person, especially when they get older, though the national recommendation is 12 years of age and older, everybody should get hearing tests regularly. And if their hearing is not normal, they should get a hearing aid and wear it. So I'll just say my grandmother had a hearing aid, refused to wear it. But it's just, they need to wear it because there's something about hearing stimulating your brain that's important. And of course, for social interactions and for using your brain, listening to books or courses or music, you need to be able to hear well. I thought I'd take just a minute also and talk about medications. There are a whole group of medications. I'm not going to go through all of these, but there are a lot of medications, especially the anticholinergic medications, that are particularly bad for the old brain. We know that we need the cholinergic connections in our brains for things like memory. And to give people anticholinergic drugs actually can greatly impair that, especially if it's taken at higher doses and over a long period of time. So I would just suggest anybody who's got older people on some of these medications, you might want to work with your pharmacist or look in the literature and see if there's something that might be as effective or maybe a lower dose or something, because these are not good medicines for older people. Now, obviously, people have medical problems for which they may need these. But again, just be aware that these are a problem and do indeed increase your risk of cognitive impairment and dementia. But there are also over-the-counter meds that can be bad. Benadryl probably is the number one out there, but most people who take things like Tylenol PM may not even realize it's got diphenhydramine or Benadryl in it. And then, of course, there's the heartburn medicines, Pepcid, Zantac. I mean, you see those on TV all the time. And then a lot of the anti-allergy medicines. So just be aware of this. And if you have a patient comes in saying, I'm starting to have trouble with my memory, one of the first things I do is look and see if I've got my patient on one of these drugs and maybe I need to change the drugs. But there are all other risk factors. Obviously, if anybody is smoking, they need to stop. Sleeping is critically important. You know, it's become like almost the catchphrase for just about everything can be made worse in your life, your heart disease, cognition, all sorts of things if you're not getting good sleep. We've had people come to us that are only sleeping an hour or two at night. Well, obviously, that's going to really severely impact your brain function. So we do want people to work on sleep. And then good control of chronic diseases. And the two that seem to be especially important for brain health is blood pressure and diabetes. And then just reducing stress. And as we're going into a whole day of heat advisory, hydration is incredibly important. But of course, we're also dealing with people who have trouble with urinary incontinence or various things, getting up at night and having to go to the bathroom, et cetera. So this becomes a discussion about how to do it in a way that is good for their brain, but does not then impact their sleep, for example. Here's just some references. If you're interested, you can go to and look at these. And then I put in here both references that are medical sort of scientific studies. These are good quality articles that refer back to these studies, but are a lot easier to read by somebody who's not in science. And so there's ones on the mind diet and other kinds of Mediterranean diet. This is one on exercise and movement. And he just talks about walking and exercise may aid the aging brain and things like that. So here's ones on social engagement, using your brain, staying sharp, and then stress, sleep, hearing, et cetera. And then I threw in just some other ones about things. And my favorite, of course, is that dark chocolate is actually really good for your brain, because that's my favorite thing to eat when I'm hungry for something that is somewhat sweet. So anyway, those are all in there. And again, here's just some national resources, the Healthy Aging with Health and Human Services, the National Institute on Aging, et cetera. So I put in a lot of things if you're interested, but bottom line, for those of you who are Star Trek fans, we all need to live long and prosper. So